Blended Scotch outsells single malts nearly 2 to 1. It accounts for 68% of the entire global Scotch market. And yet, walk into any whiskey bar and blended Scotch gets treated like the budget option. The bottle you mix with ginger ale, while the single malts sit behind glass, looking important. Except by the time you climb a few levels, blended Scotch goes from forgettable to some of the most complex whiskey Scotland has ever produced. These are the 7 levels of blended Scotch, and exactly where your money starts working for you. Before we start climbing, a quick distinction that matters. Blended Scotch means malt whiskey and grain whiskey combined. That is different from blended malt, which is only malts from different distilleries mixed together. Everything in this video is blended Scotch, grain and malt together, the category that built the entire Scotch industry. Level 1. The bottom shelf. Anything under $15. This is where blended Scotch earns its bad reputation. Bottles like Clan-MacGregor, Scoresby and Scottish Leader live here. They exist for one reason, and it is not flavour. These are volume products built to fill plastic handles and sit behind dive bars where nobody asks what brand of Scotch is in the well. The grain whiskey in these bottles does most of the heavy lifting, and by heavy lifting I mean providing ethanol at the lowest possible cost. The malt component is minimal, sometimes as low as 10 to 15% of the blend, and the whiskies used are often barely past the legal minimum of 3 years in oak. Caramel colouring does the rest of the work, making something that spent 3 years in a tired cask look like it has been aging for a decade. You will notice a harshness on the finish, a one-dimensional sweetness from the colouring, and very little complexity. If someone hands you a Clan-MacGregor neat and tells you blended Scotch is not worth drinking, they are not entirely wrong about that specific bottle. They are just wrong about the entire category. The only real use case here is as a mixer in a drink where the Scotch is sharing space with strong flavours, ginger ale, cola, or a Rob Roy with sweet vermouth. Even then, spending $5 more gets you into a different world entirely. Level 2. The mixer tier, $15 to $25, this is where blended Scotch starts earning its keep. Bottles like Famous Grouse, Grant's Triplewood, Cutty Sark and Teacher's Highland Cream occupy this shelf. They are still primarily designed for mixing, but the difference in quality from level 1 is immediate. The malt percentages climb. Teacher's Highland Cream runs around 45% malt whiskey in the blend, which is significantly higher than the industry average for this price point. That extra malt shows up as actual flavour, a smoky, cereal-forward character that makes Teacher's one of the most underrated blends on any shelf. Famous Grouse uses whiskies from Highland Park and Macallan in its blend. At $18 to $20, you are getting components from 2 of Scotland's most respected distilleries in a bottle that costs less than a mediocre lunch. Grant's Triplewood, as the name suggests, uses 3 different cask types in the maturation process, adding layers of vanilla and fruit that a single cask bottom shelf blend cannot touch. This tier is the workhorse of the Scotch industry. These are the bottles that move millions of cases globally because they deliver consistent, approachable flavour at a price that does not require a second thought. For highballs, these are genuinely good. A Famous Grouse and soda is practically the national drink of Scotland. For sipping neat, they are serviceable, but you will notice the limitations, especially on the finish, where the grain whiskey thins out and the youth shows through. One bottle worth calling out specifically is Black and White. It won a double gold at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition and typically sits between $15 and $20. It is not flashy. It does not have a marketing department trying to make it a lifestyle brand. It just quietly delivers clean, balanced Scotch at a price that makes you wonder why anyone would ever reach for level 1. Level 3. The Daily Sipper. $25 to $40. This is the level where blended Scotch transforms from a mixing ingredient into something you actually want to drink on its own. And for a lot of people, this is where the journey should start. Johnnie Walker Black Label is the benchmark of this tier. It contains whiskies from every Scotch-producing region in Scotland, all aged a minimum of 12 years. The result is a blend that can do everything. Neat, it delivers smoke, dried fruit, and vanilla. On ice, it opens up into something sweeter and more approachable. In a cocktail, it holds its own without disappearing. At around $30 to $35, Black Label remains one of the best values in all of Scotch whisky, single malt included. Chivas Regal 12 sits right alongside it. The Speyside character comes through clearly, all honey, apple and butterscotch with a creamier texture than Black Label. Where Black Label leans smoky and broad, Chivas 12 leans sweet and smooth. They are almost opposite ends of the blended Scotch spectrum at the same price point, which means picking between them is a matter of personal preference rather than quality. Dewar's 12 splits the difference between the two with a balanced profile that leans slightly sweet. Dewar's uses a process they call double aging, where up to 40 individual whiskies are blended together and then returned to first fill bourbon casks for an additional maturation period. That extra time married in wood rounds off the rough edges you still occasionally find in other 12-year blends. The reason this tier works so well is that 12 years is the tipping point for grain whiskey. Below that age, grain whiskey tends to taste thin and spirity. At 12 years, the wood has had enough time to add vanilla, coconut, and toffee notes that give the blend a foundation. The malts then layer complexity on top of that base instead of fighting against it. The gap between level 2 and level 3 is where newcomers have their awakening moment. You go from, I guess Scotch is fine, to, wait, this is actually really good. The grain whiskey at this tier is better quality, the malt components are more carefully selected, and the minimum age statements mean nothing in the bottle is young enough to bite. If someone asks you where to start with blended Scotch, this is the shelf you point them to. Level 4. The craft tier, $40 to $70. Now we are getting into territory where blending becomes an art form and where some of the most interesting whiskey in Scotland lives. Compass Box Glasgow Blend is the standard bearer here. Founded in the year 2000 by John Glaser, Compass Box takes a fundamentally different approach to blending. Where the big houses use blending to create consistency across millions of bottles, Compass Box uses it to create flavour combinations that no single distillery could produce alone. The Glasgow blend includes a heavily peated component that gives it a backbone you rarely find in blended Scotch. It is also bottled with natural colour and no chill filtration, which means every ounce of flavour the cask put in stays in the glass. At around $45 to $50, it regularly embarrasses single malts twice its price. Ballantine's 17 is the aged counterweight. It won Jim Murray's World Whisky of the Year in 2011 and has quietly stacked International Spirits Challenge gold medals ever since. 17 years of maturation in a blended Scotch means the grain whiskey has had enough time to develop real character, not just provide a neutral canvas for the malts. The result is honeyed, floral, gently smoky, and absurdly smooth for the price. Johnnie Walker Double Black takes the Black Label formula and pushes it toward heavier peat and more aggressive cask influence, using heavily charred oak. At around $40, it bridges the gap between the daily sipper tier and the craft tier, without requiring a major jump in spending. Another bottle worth knowing at this level is Pig's Nose, a 5-year-old blend that leans entirely into smoothness. The name plays on the old farming expression that good whiskey should be as smooth as a pig's nose, and at around $25 to $35, it delivers exactly that. Created by master blender Richard Patterson, it combines Speyside, Lowland and Highland malts with gentle grain whiskey from Invergordon. No peat, no smoke, just clean malt and grain in easy harmony. It is the opposite of Glasgow Blend in every way, which is exactly the point. Level 4 gives you options that have actual personality rather than just brand names. This tier is where blended Scotch converts the skeptics. If someone tells you blended whiskey cannot compete with single malts, hand them a glass of Compass Box, Glasgow Blend, or Ballantine's 17 and watch the argument dissolve. Level 5. The Premium, $70 to $150. Here the conversation shifts. You are no longer buying a bottle for Tuesday night, you are buying something you pour slowly and pay attention to. Johnnie Walker 18 is the flagship of this tier. It blends up to 18 different whiskies, all aged a minimum of 18 years. The complexity is legitimate. Layers of dark chocolate, dried fruit, gentle spice, and a finish that lingers for minutes. At around $85 to $100, it represents a meaningful step up from Black Label, and many whiskey professionals consider it the best value in the entire Johnnie Walker range. Chivas 18 leans into its Speyside roots with more pronounced sherry cask influence. Dark fruit, marmalade, and baking spices, all wrapped in a velvety texture that makes the price feel justified. The Dewar's Double Double series occupies the experimental edge of this level. The 21-year-old finished in Mizunara Japanese oak casks brings an entirely different dimension to blended Scotch, with sandalwood, incense, and green tea notes you would never expect from a Scottish blend. It is a perfect example of how blending, combined with creative cask finishing, can create something that no single distillery expression could replicate. At this price point, the question is no longer whether blended Scotch can be good. It is whether it offers better value than a single malt at the same price. And the honest answer is, at level 5, blended Scotch wins that argument more often than people expect. A Johnnie Walker 18 at $90 will hold its own against any single malt in the same bracket. The difference is that the blend delivers breadth, dozens of flavor notes woven together, while a single malt delivers depth from one distillery's character. Neither is better. They are different tools for different moods. Quick question before we keep going. What level are you sitting at right now? If Chivas 12 or Black Label is your everyday pour, you are level 3. If you have already discovered Compass Box or Ballantine 17, you are level 4. Drop your level in the comments, and if you are not subscribed yet, now is a good time. Over 80% of you watching have not hit that button. Level 6, the Prestige, $150 to $350. This is where blended Scotch enters the luxury conversation and where the debate about what you are actually paying for gets interesting. Johnnie Walker Blue Label is the most famous bottle on this shelf and arguably the most debated whiskey in the world. It retails for around $190 to $250 depending on where you buy it. The blend contains whiskies from distilleries that no longer exist, so-called ghost distilleries like Port Dundas and Cambus that shut down decades ago. Every drop from those closed facilities is irreplaceable, and that scarcity is baked into the price. The liquid itself is undeniably smooth. Honey, dark chocolate, a faint wisp of smoke, and a finish that goes on and on. Is it worth $200? That depends entirely on what you are comparing it to. Against a $100 single malt, Blue Label often loses on complexity and character. Against the experience of opening something that feels genuinely special, sharing it with someone who matters, it earns its place. Royal Salute 21 is the other pillar of this tier. Created in 1953 to celebrate the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, every whiskey in the blend is aged a minimum of 21 years. The liquid comes in a handmade porcelain flagon crafted from Cornish clay that takes nearly a week to produce. Priced around $130 to $170, it undercuts Blue Label on price while offering comparable or better complexity. The nose alone, dried stone fruits, orange marmalade, gentle smoke, and a faint floral note tells you this is serious whiskey regardless of the category on the label. Royal Salute also releases special editions tied to cultural moments, like the Coronation of King Charles edition at $25,000 for 53 bottles. At that point, you have left level 6 entirely and landed in collector territory. The truth about level 6 is that you are paying a premium for brand and packaging as much as you are paying for liquid. That does not make it a scam. It means you should be honest about what you are buying and why. If the occasion calls for something that feels important when you put it on the table, Blue Label and Royal Salute deliver that experience. If you are drinking alone on a Wednesday and want the best possible scotch for your money, Level 4 and 5 will serve you better. Level 7, the collector, $350 and beyond. Now we leave the world of drinking whiskey and enter the world of owning whiskey. At level 7, the bottles become investment pieces, conversation starters, and in some cases, museum exhibits. Compass Box hedonism anchors the entry point of this tier in an unexpected way. Originally a core range bottle at around $150, hedonism became a limited annual release starting in 2024 because the aged grain whiskey required to produce it became too scarce to maintain year-round availability. The 2026 edition uses 30-year-old whiskey from Strathclyde Distillery, blended with 20 to 24-year-old stocks from Cameron Bridge and the shuttered Port Dundas facility. At $165, it technically sits at the border of level 6, but the limited production and use of Ghost Distillery stocks push it into collector mindset. Johnnie Walker Blue Label Ghost and Rare editions occupy the middle of this tier. Each release spotlights a specific silent distillery, Brora, Port Ellen, or Petit Veitch, blended with active distillery malts to create a snapshot of flavors that can never be reproduced once those ghost stocks run dry. Prices range from $350 to over $500, depending on the edition. Royal Salute takes it further. The Time Series 52-year-old is a blend where every component whiskey sat in oak for at least 38 years before being married in a single American oak barrel for the final stage of maturation. Only 106 bottles exist. Price tag, $30,000 each. Master blender Sandy Hyslop described the result as having unrivaled depth and complexity, which at $30,000 it absolutely should. At the extreme end sits the Johnnie Walker Masters of Flavor 48-year-old, released in 2019 to mark the brand's 200th anniversary. 48 years of aging in a blended scotch. The retail price was just under $50,000. The Johnnie Walker Diamond Jubilee, commissioned for Queen Elizabeth's 60th year on the throne, was limited to 60 bottles at roughly $135,000 each. At level 7, the whiskey inside may be extraordinary, but the price is driven by scarcity, provenance, and collectability, rather than any measurable improvement in taste over level 5 or 6. A bottle of Johnnie Walker, 18 at $90, delivers 95% of the drinking pleasure you would get from a $30,000 Royal Salute. The other 5% costs you $29,910. That math only makes sense if you are collecting, investing, or celebrating something truly once in a lifetime. So where is the sweet spot? It depends on what you are doing with the glass. If you are mixing, level 2 gets the job done, and then some. Teacher's Highland Cream at under $20 is one of the best kept secrets in Scotch, and Black and White at $15 has no business being as good as it is. If you are sipping, level 3 is the entry point, and Johnnie Walker Black Label at $30 remains the undisputed champion of everyday blended Scotch. If you want to understand what blending can really achieve as a craft, level 4 is where it gets exciting. Compass Box Glasgow. Blend and Ballantyne's 17 will permanently change how you think about blends. And if you want to pour something special without overthinking it, Johnnie Walker 18 at level 5 is the move. If you want a simple upgrade path, here it is. If you are drinking famous grouse tonight, your next bottle should be Johnnie Walker Black Label. If you are on Black Label, try Compass Box Glasgow Blend. If Glasgow Blend already sits on your shelf, Johnnie Walker 18 is the next step. One level at a time. No rush. And if someone tells you blended Scotch is not real whiskey, remind them that blends built the entire Scotch industry, account for over 60% of global Scotch exports worth over £3 billion, and remain the backbone of whiskey culture worldwide. At the end of the day, the best blended Scotch in the world is the one you enjoy pouring. Whether that is a $15 black and white in a highball glass or a $200 blue label neat, nobody gets to tell you that your preference is wrong. Drink what you like the way you like it. That is the only rule that actually matters. If you enjoyed this, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.